All right, hello everybody, and welcome to your Unit 3 podcast. As you can probably hear from my voice, I have a cold. My lovely tiny humans decided to share their germs with me, so I will make this as quick as I can. Okay, so this webcast is focusing specifically on your Unit 3 writing assignment. You'll notice that there are instructions on how to do well that are available in your shell. You can look for the APA citation guide. You can also look at the reading lift on the left-hand side, and also there are some general writing instructions on your papers in the syllabus. I cannot encourage you enough to look over all of these guidelines as well as other resources, because people often lose points for technical writing issues and because they're not following the required format that the paper should require. So be sure to look at those. In general terms, be sure that whichever of the two questions that you choose, that you include the question number. So that is something that counts as points in your paper. If you do not indicate which prompt you are writing on, you will lose points. So do not assume that I will know which questions you have provided answers to, because there are similarities between the prompts. So be sure to indicate whether you are responding to prompt number 1 or prompt number 2. And again, you will lose points if you don't indicate that. So also be sure that you answer all parts of whatever prompt you have chosen. There is an A, B, C, and D section for these parts. Make sure that you answer each one of those parts. The best way that I think to do is to label them, so provide section headings for how you're responding to each prompt. Don't put the actual question in, but instead come up with a heading title that indicates that you are responding to specific prompt. This can help guide. Another thing that I want you to do is to make sure that you cite your sources. You must cite the course readings, and you need to cite the original readings. It's not enough just to use the PowerPoints. It's not enough just to use the films. You actually have to go back to the readings and use the readings. If you use direct quotes, which I encourage you to do to support your claims, you need to cite them properly following APA. And while I encourage you to do them, these should be used as supplemental to your argument, not as the main argument. I should not read papers that are mostly just direct references to the course material, right? So you give your point and then you support it with evidence. So you don't have your paper being the vast majority of somebody else's words. Quotes, again, should be used merely as illustrative because the point, you've already made the point, you're just supporting it. So think about this writing assignment as twofold. It is just as much about the content of your paper as it is about the writing of your paper. And so be sure that you are thinking about the grammar, the syntax, the ways in which you format your paper, citing, and things like that. So the technical writing part of it is just as important as the content writing. Another thing that you should keep in mind is that you are writing essentially for an intelligent college sophomore who has not taken this class. So this means, just like I've said in your discussion board posts, you need to provide some kind of context. A lot of you are starting conversations in the middle and assume that the reader knows what you're referring to, and instead in these papers you need to be sure that you are giving the kind of background and context so that the reader understands what you're referring to. Okay, so prompt 1, we'll start with that one. So it says, drawing on the readings and any other links and videos you have selected, you need to explain how Rawls was trying to correct or improve Mills's utilitarianism and Hobbes and Rousseau's classic social contract theory. B, how Rawls's veil of ignorance and difference principle might be applied to one of the following problems, be that healthcare provisions, solving the current economic problems of unemployment and national debt, rebuilding of the government of either Iraq or Syria, or any other troubled nation of your choosing. C, would Churchill conclude that Rawls's modifications promote greater fairness? Why or why not? And here you want to be sure to cite the course and provide some background on the nation and or outside issue you choose to discuss above. Okay, so first, do not assume that any of these are the same theory, right? So some people write about Mill as if he was a contractarian and a utilitarian, and he wasn't. He was only a utilitarian. So remember that. You want to give a little bit of background so that I, the intelligent college sophomore who's reading your paper, understand what basic utilitarianism is and what basic social contract theory is. You can talk about Mill as a utilitarian because Mill is the utilitarian that Rawls took the most issue with. On the social contract theory that Rawls is critiquing, you can talk about either Rousseau or Hobbes. So you need to explain those theories and explain what Rawls's criticism of these theories are and how Rawls is trying to correct or improve utilitarianism and social contract. So there are different aspects of Rawls that addresses these things, and so he thought that utilitarians did not show enough concern for individuals as ends in and of themselves and of the rights of individuals. So he was trying to include safeguards for the worth of each individual. And for the social contract side, he thought that they weren't necessarily fair about how they made up the rules. So what did he try to insert? When you get to that, the later case, he tried to insert the veil of ignorance, right? And so what are those principles? What was the veil of ignorance and his basic principles of justice? Be sure to explain those concepts. How were they supposed to be improving on utilitarianism or social contract theory? Okay, so the next part of the question focuses on Rawls's difference principle and the veil of ignorance. So regardless of which option you choose, you need to have an outside source to explain that. So for example, if you choose a healthcare issue, you need to have an outside source that discusses what the healthcare problem is, and you need to be sure to cite your source following APA. You could select healthcare in the US, or you could select healthcare in Canada, and then discuss how they ensure fairness. So regardless of what example you use, you need to inform your reader what your outside source is and give the background before you apply it to Rawls. Okay, so additionally, you should make a good introduction, right? So no matter which prompt you're choosing to respond to, make a good introduction. Tell us what you're going to tell us. The body should be where you make your points in an organized fashion, and then the conclusion is essentially going to summarize what your main points were and draw some kind of conclusion. So I encourage you to work from an outline that will keep yourself organized. You should also have a thesis statement, and you'll notice on the tab to the left, it provides resources for writing a strong thesis statement. So that's a really important thing, right? Because the thesis statement is about what is your overall argument. And so for prompt 1, it could be something like Rawls added the veil of ignorance and the difference principle to try to balance the problems that he observed in utilitarianism and social contract theory. These additions were effective except for fill in the blank here. So here you would add your critique. And then you need to have an argument. So you need to make the claim of what your argument is. I have given you the prompts so that you can actually build an argument around it and organize your paper. And then the last part of prompt 1 looks at Churchill. So on this part, Churchill is criticizing the classic social contract theories like Hobbes and Rousseau, but he does not cite Rawls or specifically address Rawls. And so what I'm asking you to do is if Rawls addresses any of Churchill's criticism. So while Churchill is not specifically talking about Rawls, what I want you to do is take what Rawls is talking about and see if it addresses those criticisms that Churchill wages against the other social contract theories. So would Churchill conclude that Rawls is actually improving on the theory? Would he say no, it's just more of the same? You could give either answer, you could pick either direction, but to get full points, you need to justify your response and provide evidence and course reference. So why do you argue what you argued, essentially? Okay, so part 2 is totally focused on Rawls and Churchill. So the prompt asks, what word Churchill's criticism of social contract theory clearly applies to classic social contract theories that we discussed. However, Rawls adds the veil of ignorance concept to his more modern social contract theory. So A, explain the basics of Rawls and Churchill's arguments and how they each criticize social contract theory. B, discuss whether or not Churchill's argument applies to Rawls's modification and explain how and why it does or does not apply to Rawls's theory. And then C, it asks you what remedies might you deduce from Rawls's theory that would address the injustices toward American Indians. Okay, so you first need to explain the basic principles of Rawls's theory and how Rawls thought he was improving over Hobbes, Rousseau, and Locke, and then explain Churchill's critiques of classic Hobbes, Rousseau, and Locke types. Then you have to discuss whether or not Churchill's argument applies to Rawls's modification. So here we're looking at things like the veil of ignorance and the difference principle. You can choose to argue either way. You just have to support it and justify it. And then for part C, you have to have explained Churchill's take on injustices of American Indians and Rawls's theory, and then you will need to apply Rawls's theory specifically. So you have to explain those two first before you can actually apply it. And then when you conclude, you would conclude whether you think Rawls really makes a difference for American Indians. Okay, so that's some of the things to think about while you're writing. The main thing, and I really can't stress this enough, is that you keep in mind that you are writing for an intelligent college sophomore, and this intelligent college sophomore has not taken this class, so you need to provide background and context. You need to explain the theories, and you need to contextualize your quotes. Do not assume that quotes speak for themselves. You have to give them some kind of context, either introduce them before you use them or discuss them after. If you have any other questions, I want to encourage you to meet with the Writing Mentor program. You can ask me, but really you want to write your paper, put it away, come back to it, and then read it. Often what I see here is students who haven't taken the time to go back through and give it a really thorough, solid proofreading, and so many of the points that they miss are things like improper citations, improper formatting, not answering all parts of the questions, not using subheadings, forgetting to include the prompt, etc., etc. So be sure that you have done all the things that the guidelines are asking you to, and then read it through one more time to make sure that you have caught any citation errors or any grammar or spelling errors. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I look forward to reading your papers, and I hope you have a great Halloween. Okay.